Welcome to the Ending Sexploitation podcast, where we decode sexual harm and provide you with active solutions. I'm your host, Kaylee McNamara. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode, joined once again by the amazing Dani Pinter. Thanks, Dani, for joining us from the NCOSE Law Center.
Yeah, great to be with you here today, Haley. Crazy times.
Crazy times. And today we're going to be talking about two major updates and really like headline global news sex trafficking cases, which are the trial of Diddy and then recent news around Jeffrey Epstein. A lot to unpack here. Just, I guess, up front to give the updates. I'm sure everyone has heard by now that Sean Diddy Combs, was acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing for racketeering, conspiracy, and also sex trafficking. He was found guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, which could carry up to 20 years in prison, although that's, my opinion, really unlikely. I think he'll get far less. So that has been headline news. And then, of course, the news about the Department of Justice releasing a memo around Jeffrey Epstein. But before we get into that, maybe we start off with, what was your reaction, Dani, when you heard about this, in large parts, acquittal of Diddy? We did have an episode really recently where we talked more about the case. But yeah, just your general thoughts on how what the jury decided.
Yeah, I was super disappointed, Haley. Super disappointed. I think the jury got it wrong. I think I just say that. I think the jury got it wrong. I think that the prosecution proved their case. I know the trafficking statute very well, and we can get into why I think they proved their case. But so, in kind of thinking about what went wrong and why was he acquitted, this case, there's a lot of things going on. Like the fact that he is an incredible celebrity, right? Like one of the most famous people on earth, and largely not a notorious celebrity that people didn't like. Like he was a beloved celebrity, generally speaking, like very charming, and people really liked him. So I don't think you can discount that star power. But I think it was unfortunately a disappointing reflection of where society is. And I think I probably said that in our last podcast, which is that whatever the jury decides will be a good thermometer, a good barometer of where we are in American culture and society, and understanding sex trafficking, coercion, sexual abuse. And I'm sorry to say
the result. I thought of that. You said this is gonna be such a sign for where we are in our cultural understanding of what sex trafficking is. So we failed the test.
Yeah, I think we failed the test. I'm sorry to say that. And I was of two minds. I had a lot of concerns that he would be acquitted, but then I was also feeling very hopeful. So I was somewhat shocked and disappointed when I saw that he was acquitted of sex trafficking. And particularly because I think I got my hopes up when the jury came back and said, pretty quickly, like, we've come to a conclusion on all of the counts except for RICO, and we're still deliberating on that. Well, that now to think the fact they had come to a conclusion so quickly, I took this as a sign that they were going to convict. And to think that they quickly, unanimously concluded he was not guilty on sex trafficking is extremely depressing. And just as a reminder to everyone, there was 29 days of trial put on by the prosecution, dozens and dozens of witnesses, testimony by victims that was corroborated repeatedly by many victims in Diddy's employ, and the defense did not put on a defense. They went for 25 minutes, and that's it. You had 29 days of trial.
I feel like I'm seeing that talked about, that
in 25 minutes.
For less than half an hour in defense of him.
Exactly. So that means they didn't have anything to dispute. Like, for everyone, like, this isn't O.J. Simpson or a case where Diddy or Diddy not do it. I'm saying Diddy, you know what I mean? Like, it's not Diddy do it because there's some other culprit out there that's not him. It's no, he did all these things. are these things the crimes he's charged with? Because there's no dispute, and I'm curious, like I'm trying to find jury interviews because usually those can be really revealing. I saw
Mhm.
very short, briefly one who, like a reporter was asking, was this basically was the celebrity of Diddy influencing your decision? And the juror got offended and was like, no, like we made our decision on the facts, how they were presented to us, and the language of the statute, which I found an odd thing to say and an interesting thing to say because the sex trafficking statutory language is actually very, very broad. So to
Mhm.
think that they didn't find him guilty under that statute and actually paying attention to the statute and not their own biases is troubling. It's really
Mhm.
troubling because I think it just means at the end of the day, we don't understand coercion. We do not
Yeah.
understand coercion at all, and that a jury apparently cannot understand an adult being coerced, in the context of a romantic relationship. So like, and I remember we were discussing domestic violence, like, oh, we get domestic violence. Like, I don't think we do. I really
Mhm.
don't think we do. I think that's what they struggled with understanding like, oh yes, we know he would violently beat Cassie. We saw it on tape. Yes, we know that he threatened to blackmail these women with these sex tapes because it's in texts. And it's literally confirmed. This is not just testimony, text messages of him threatening to do that, and text messages of the girls pleading with KK's co-conspirator about that specifically. So those things are confirmed. Blackmail and physical violence, but because these women were in an ongoing relationship that they didn't leave, that they weren't chained up, they just
Mhm.
concluded that they could not have been coerced. I mean, that's my diagnosis of this, that I find so upsetting.
Yeah, that's how it seems to me too. And I blame the 2008 movie Taken for the jury's decision in the Diddy trial. It portrayed sex trafficking as this violent kidnap of a virginal blonde overseas who's held captive in chains and dungeons. And like that cultural image, and I mean, it's been portrayed elsewhere too, but people can't shake that imagery and they can't imagine that coercion could also include psychological coercion, that it could be like domestic abuse when a person is being abused but might still think that they're in love with that person who's hurting them, and that they can't imagine that a victim might consent to some scenarios of sexual activity but not to others. I think that that's another angle in this too. Like they can't, it's hard for our culture to wrap their brains aren't anything but the quote unquote perfect victim, like the virgin who is kidnapped against her will, that someone could engage in some things and then not consent to other things. And I just think that it's also, think it's a shame that the prosecution didn't do better at educating around those themes and issues and coercion. I mean, I don't know how closely you followed that, Dani, if they did talk about what coercion looks like, that the statute is broad on purpose because coercion is more than just physical violence.
So they did have an
It's
expert. Yeah. So they did have an expert to discuss coercive control, like in this context of relationships. And I didn't follow that testimony or read it, but it was like referenced by the prosecutor. Like the prosecutor in closing arguments, for example, mentioned, you heard from our expert witness who talked about these kinds of dynamics and described exactly basically Jane Doe and Cassie, whom she never met. And that's because this is exactly the pattern, that leads me to think they did try. Now maybe one expert wasn't enough. And I wonder if there was a place for more of just a generally human trafficking expert on what is human trafficking, but maybe the court wouldn't have allowed that in. I mean, I have never been a criminal prosecutor because there's a lot more to this that could be going on that I don't understand. Maybe education of the jury wasn't sufficient, although the prosecution did at least try that to do that. I think your blaming of Taken is correct, but incomplete. I would also blame Sound of Freedom. And I actually
Mhm.
wanted to bring up a really analogous case to make the case why I think the part two, right? In the cultural consciousness of human trafficking is Taken and Sound of Freedom. It is if it's an adult, she's violently kidnapped in a foreign country, and if it's and or is a child. again,
Yeah.
with the immigration sort of foreign country element, but it's either an adult captured, chained up, or a child.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the R. Kelly situation, which is very similar in the sense that hugely popular celebrity, similar in demographics and likability. People love R. Kelly. Again, he was very charming. People still love his music. He was convicted on all counts, again, including RICO. Why? Because and same, like the RICO one really gets me because the fact that they didn't find RICO too just shows me that that the jury had in my opinion, that the jury had a bias against
Mhm.
believing that Diddy should be held criminally accountable. Basically, they didn't believe that these victims deserved his he deserved a slap on the wrist for what he did to these victims. I think if we're going to get if we're going to kind of psychologically drill into it, they thought, yeah, not a nice guy, he deserves a slap on the wrist because again, RICO was met. You had so many employees committing crimes with him. One potential mistake by the prosecution is that they did not bring KK to the stand. Potentially that could have been the biggest issue where the jury just couldn't understand, well, who is he conspiring with? He's conspiring alone. He seemed to be the only one benefiting from this situation. So that could have been, and that's like what the defense's argument was, is like, conspiracy with who? Who's his co-conspirator? And it was KK is at least one. But the statute is that two or more people are acting together in a pattern of criminal practice through a commercial enterprise. So his employees working with him through a criminal enterprise is RICO. It doesn't have to be that they're also getting the freak offs and that they're also getting the financial benefits. Like it's that they're working together knowingly coordinating in a crime. And what they got was proximity to Diddy. And what that looks like on their resume and the esteem of that. So the only reason they didn't convict, in my opinion, is because of their entire skewed view of this. Because R. Kelly is the same thing. He was enabled by a crowd around him. He was not violent. I think Diddy was probably more violent. He was more sexually depraved, R. Kelly, arguably, although it's hard to say. Diddy was immensely sexually depraved. I think the only difference is that there were children. There were child victims in R. Kelly. And so because there were child victims, that eliminated the question of, is he a monster? Is he a sex predator? He was. So then they found him guilty on everything, including Rico, who was his co-conspirator.
Mm-hmm.
R. Kelly was the only one abusing these people. He wasn't making money off of this. The only difference between R. Kelly and Diddy is that R. Kelly perped on child victims. That's the only
And
difference in terms of evidence, theory of the case.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on too is probably confusion and misconceptions around what sex trafficking is, and thoughts that to sex traffic someone, you need to sex traffic someone to a third party for it
Yeah.
to qualify. Like, I think that if, the fact that this was in many cases, it seems potentially self gratification, although there were also groups there. So, like, I don't know all of those details, but I think that maybe also caused
Yeah.
confusion.
I think it did. We as the public became aware of his broader potential criminal implication that didn't come in this case. And I mean, I think we're probably all left wondering why. Like, why aren't there any male victims when many male victims have come forward? And why are none of the celebrity parties part of the prosecution?
Right.
Only the freak offs that he conducted with the women he was abusing and the prostituted persons he engaged in that. You know, why was the prosecution so narrow? I'm sure that didn't help things, but um, to your point, like the sex trafficking statute covers that and not accidentally. It's meant to. It's meant to cover all areas of coercive sexual activity that involves money because the very point is You are using wealth, you are using means of commerce, use your money, you're incentivizing money. We're now financially incentivizing the sexual abuse of people and exploitation of people. That's what the sex trafficking statute covers. And in Europe, the Palermo Protocol is even more broad than ours. Like, sex trafficking has never been and is never was only what is depicted in Taken and the other one. Like, it's not
Mhm.
only snatching people up and kidnapping them or smuggling them between countries. That's literally just a, a, a fiction that
One
apparently we all believe, right? So I mean, that's kind of like where I'm like, okay, NCOSE, like, we have work to do. I mean, that is a public education opportunity, because people just, we don't understand sex trafficking.
so disturbing and so upsetting. I think, like, my final thoughts on this, I agree, is just that there's so much more education. And I think if we're looking for one more media item to blame, I think we would also probably look at the pornography industry. I would too, as blame as well, for the purpose of, I think that so many, now we know by statistically there are pornography users who are on every jury, including juries on sexual violence, and that industry portrays women as participants in their own sexual harm very often, and very much normalizes violence and sex. And I just think that those lessons are learned as well. And so I think when you combine, so many people on juries are viewing violence against women and viewing the women as consenting to it and desiring it and saying that it's great. And then they see what seems to be a confusing sex trafficking case, and they don't understand what coercion is. I just think it's a recipe for bad decisions.
Yeah, I think you're really right. And also, just to point out that P. Diddy was a pornography addict, and that pornography played a role in his entire abuse of these women. He would not only film them, but he would, like, he got them to start watching pornography with him before he approached them with the freak offs. He groomed them via pornography, watching pornography together. And then he would, like, make them watch back the videos of themselves,
Wow.
the abuse videos that he created. So that was all wrapped up in the abuse. And like we always talk about, sexual abuse and exploitation really doesn't happen in these cabined off, isolated vacuums. It's a tangled and interconnected web.
Mhm. Absolutely. Any last thoughts on Diddy before we go over to another powerful, well-connected man who was related to sex trafficking and liked to film things and maybe has had some protection from justice institutions?
Yeah, let's let the hits keep on coming, Haley.
It's been a rough few days. I'm not gonna lie. It's so discouraging seeing the Department of Justice and FBI memo come out. I'm sure many have seen it by now or heard summaries, but in short, they confirmed that there were images and videos of victims. They said over 10,000 downloaded videos and images of illegal child sexual abuse material and other pornography. There's always adult pornography as well. It doesn't get the headlines as much as the child sexual abuse material, but so over 10,000, videos, and that they did a review and they said that there was no incriminating client list. They said there's no credible evidence that there was blackmail around these sex crimes. And yeah, yeah. And they also said that, confirmed that he harmed over 1,000 victims, that there are over 1,000 victims in this case. And I don't know, Danny, if you saw just on Tuesday, so yesterday for when we're recording this, at the White House, I don't know if you saw that Pam Bondi and President Trump were asked about this, and it was a really fascinating, quick exchange by a reporter. And, Trump saying, "I can't believe you're wasting time asking about Epstein," and Pam Bondi walking back a comment where she had previously said in reports that she had the Epstein client list on her desk and then said, no, she was just referring to the file on Epstein, not to any client list. So it's just been a lot of walking back on something that has been discussed not only by this administration, but obviously for years now. There's a lot of public records and reporting that's gone on, and they're wrapping up, it seems, and have found nothing further to look into.
That's their
What are your
position.
thoughts?
Yeah, that this is it. Case closed was their
Mm-hmm.
message. Obviously, there's tons of conspiracy theories swirling and circling. I don't think there's a person out there satisfied by this response by DOJ. And not so we don't need to get into all of that. I'm sure we feel similarly to how others are feeling. I think is most relevant for us to discuss is, and I don't see this in the headlines. I'm hardly seeing this discussed, is the 1,000 victims.
Yeah.
1,000. 1,000.
And no
1,000.
flies? So are they saying that Jeffrey Epstein himself is like the single greatest hands-on perpetrator since Genghis Khan? Like,
Literally. Literally, like that to me is the place where we can advocate for because there's all kinds of reasons why, who knows, we could don't want to get into speculation of why they don't want to release things to the public, but that's not an excuse for zero further prosecutions, because
yeah.
client list or not, there were facilitators, people knew and helped them. No one can abuse over 1,000 children, that the DOJ feels comfortable with that, saying that confidence that they've confirmed over 1,000 children were sexually abused by this person who's famous. There's no way he's not hiding in the woods. There's no way that has happened without the facilitation of others who should be
Mm-hmm.
prosecuted. And I don't believe that they're all high profile either. Why are
Right.
these facilitators not being prosecuted? It's not a priority, and that's wrong. That's very wrong. And that also, like, we don't know of 1,000 victims. The public doesn't know of 1,000. Not that we need to know their names and every detail of their life, but how are they doing? Where are they? Is the DOJ helping them? They know of 1,000 people were victimized by Epstein. They don't plan to prosecute anyone. Are they helping these victims? Are they
Mm-hmm.
alive?
Yeah.
And why haven't
Yeah.
they come forward? And why isn't the DOJ worried about them coming forward? I mean, it's disturbing.
It's disturbing. It's so disturbing. I think it's obviously a cover up. I just have to say, I think
Yeah.
that I have three really huge issues with this memo in particular. I think it is I just object to most of this, but three really big things made me angry. First, well, actually four, because number one, 1,000 victims, and they're closing the case, like you said,
Closing,
is
case
just
closed.
obscene. And then also they claim that there's no evidence of blackmail. I just feel like that's gaslighting to the public. Investigators have long reported hidden cameras on Epstein's properties, including Manhattan House, his private island. And this was widely reported, and at least two survivors have publicly claimed that there were hidden cameras used to record them being sexually abused by men for the purposes of blackmail. Two survivors have publicly said that, and it doesn't seem like they aren't addressing it. They're not explaining that away. They're just saying they don't have evidence for it, but there's two testimonies that it happened. So that's some evidence. So that's confusing to me. And then my two other issues in this memo, I feel like they're playing a lot of semantics in this memo and
Oh,
throwing
yeah.
out red herrings in two major ways. Like in this memo, and I actually think the FBI director Kash Patel said this too on an episode of Joe Rogan. They're saying, well, we're not going to re-victimize victims by releasing the videos of the
I think
child
that
porn.
made me the most mad. No one wants you to release the
Who's asking for that?
CSAM. Nobody wants that. You could
Who's
say
asking?
so and so. You could say so-and-so is the adult perpetrator in the video without showing us the video. How stupid do you think we are?
Exactly. And they have this like fake moral outrage. Like, how dare you demand information? We're not going to release child porn. No, no one was asking for it. And
No
I
one
just think that
wants
that's
you
just
to.
so clear that
So
like they're lying
gaslighty.
to us, and it's a complete red herring. No one's asking for that. And they're saying, well, we want to protect the privacy. They can investigate and prosecute people and keep privacy for victims. There's
As they
well
have been,
established.
as the entire file is been private.
Yes. And then the other thing too that I thought was a complete red herring is they're just very focused on saying that there's no client list. And obviously,
Yeah, there doesn't need to be a document. You
I'm sure there's not
compile
like
it.
a list,
Exactly.
right?
Oh, he
Saying
didn't leave
sex
a
crime.
big FBI do not open. This is my
Yeah.
client list. Like,
Like obviously it's not a literal list on Epstein's laptop, but don't patronize us when the public is
it's so
demanding the
upsetting.
client list. We're demanding accountability for the men who perpetrated sex crimes facilitated by Jeffrey Epstein.
You make the
That's
list
what we're
based on all
asking
the
for.
evidence you have in the 303 gigabytes, whatever they said, they have of information. There's no third
100.
parties in any of that. All those
And you have 10,
gigabytes.
all those gigabytes, 10,000 videos of child sexual abuse and abuse of adults.
All
And
Epstein?
there's no moment where there's a face of one of these other men that you might be able to, no correlation maybe between flight logs of particular people going to the island. And then during that time, there happens to be a video of a sex crime with a guy who kind of looks the same. Like, no suspicious amounts of money that have ever been transferred to Epstein, many of
We
which are
already
very public.
know that there has been because the banks went way down. Deutsche Bank
Mm-hmm.
and then Wells, was it not Wells Fargo? What's the other one? What bank? They
Yeah.
paid $300 million.
Yeah. Les
What
Wexner
bank was it?
from
Which
Victoria's
bank? We need to
Secret gave
know.
like 200 million.
Tim, tell us the bank. I'm sorry, we need to know.
What are the
Three.
banks?
It's one of the largest verdicts in a civil case ever, and against like a facilitator, against a financial beneficiary of sex trafficking. So the bank got a massive judgment against them for facilitating Epstein because they were on notice of suspicious financial activity related to sex trafficking that the bank should have known was sex trafficking, but the DOJ doesn't have enough to prosecute sex trafficking. Morgan, JP Morgan. Yeah, JP Morgan.
Yeah.
I love it. People love to like gloss over like, yeah, well, this whole Epstein thing just became a cash cow. I'm sorry. As a civil litigator, cash cow. Nobody's giving up money. Courts aren't like, yeah, you should pay them. And defendants are like, here's the money. It is so hard to win. It is so hard to win. It is very hard
Mm.
to win. You get all the way and get a judgment like that. That is That is tons of evidence, my friends. That is
Yeah.
like a criminal conviction. You have proven to a jury that this happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to just close the case and say that there's no more leads to follow is just so infuriating because how about, hey, how about that was kind of weird that Prince Andrew was publicly named by a victim and basically kicked out of the working royal family because of smoke about him and Jeffrey Epstein. That's weird that Melinda Gates decided to divorce Bill Gates and with multiple reports, news reports reporting that it was over her concern about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, like,
I
you're
just saw
telling
an
me that there are
interview.
no leads that you can investigate about who could have been involved or complicit. It's just, I think, a lie. And I think everyone knows that it's a lie. I don't think that they followed every lead and held everyone to account who could possibly be held to account. So,
No, they
yeah.
haven't. And maybe what's so infuriating, I've seen some people try to downplay, be like, oh, well, get over Epstein. Why are you crying about it? It's like, well, it's infuriating because, and I wasn't like an Epstein conspiracy theorist. Of course, some people like obsess over this case in a way that is unhealthy and they shouldn't. But it was a situation where undeniably someone was a sex predator and was not held accountable, and even the US government was involved in orchestrating for him no accountability. So recall, Florida, state of Florida was seeking to prosecute him in 2008 for sex trafficking many minor girls, and the federal government involved themselves to orchestrate a plea deal in which he was only convicted of prostitution of a minor, which shouldn't exist. That's sex trafficking, everyone. So he got sex trafficking by another name that holds no sentence, which
Mhm.
shouldn't exist, and is sicko. So the federal government knew he was sex trafficking children, yet intervened on his behalf to get him a lighter sentence, and he was not ostracized from society. He was then went on just like he had the day before, going on like everything is normal, continuing the behavior, continuing
Mhm.
to sex traffic people. So we're upset at the people, everyone universally, whatever your politics were, was upset, which, by the way, both sides of the aisle were implicated in that. You had,
Yeah.
I think, a Democratic DOJ, but you had Ken Starr, who's a conservative hero, hired to be involved and facilitate that deal. So it was both sides implicated in that. And everyone was rightfully outraged at the level of corruption for a sex trafficker. Okay. So we were
Mhm.
upset about that. But not only that, but we had an administration that ran off of that outrage and promised to do better. And so
Yes.
people feel
They
and
promised
kept talking about
transparency.
it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and didn't give it. So that's why people are upset. They're upset that the change they hope that happened, at least in this instance, doesn't seem to have happened. And why is that?
Mm.
And without getting into like criticizing any particular person or administration or getting into conspiracies, I just think at the end of the day, both the P. Diddy case and Epstein say to me that we as a society just do not care about sexual exploitation enough. We don't care. Everyone acts like they care. They actually
Mhm.
really don't. People
Yeah.
care more about the economy and money and things than they care about the fact that large groups of people, even children in this case, were are exploited, and holding someone accountable for that is like, just, it's too much trouble. And I think that's wrong.
Yeah. No, it's so easy to, like, the term, like, get black pilled, just like to feel so depressed with these two developments that have come back to back, because it does just really shake your, if not like shatter trust in justice institutions to rightly prioritize addressing sexual exploitation issues, to care about it. And it's one thing for the public, I think, to maybe not care or get it. I mean, I think that they should, but both of these are cases of justice institutions in the US not prioritizing it. I think
Yeah.
in or it's like the jury, it was like a jury decision in the Diddy case, but like of justice institutions failing survivors in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, I think, sadly, I mean, maybe this is just true of humanity in any upsetting event, but it's, with Diddy, to me, there's something there of the jury, why not wanting, there's always this like hesitancy to hold sex abusers accountable. I was actually
yeah.
just speaking to our colleague Kari James, who is a prosecutor both at the state level and the federal level, and she said, "Oh, in CSAM cases, like, so this is child pornography possession." She's like, Judges see that as a victimless crime. She's like, they
Yeah.
never get sentenced. They never get the sentences they should have. They always just get like probation. And I mean, the fact that judges en masse could see that as a victimless crime, and it's all connected to me. It's like people are always more
Yeah.
concerned about the potential stain of a false accusation than they are about that someone potentially got sexually abused or raped, right? They're more concerned that despite Diddy beating and blackmailing these women, maybe there's a chance that they wanted to engage in these horrific freak offs that caused them physical harm and damage. I mean,
Mhm.
what? I
Yeah.
mean, what do you mean? You had a doubt, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a very high standard. But like, you had a doubt that, he was coercing these women. That's shocking to me. And then I think at the end of the day with Epstein, it's like they just wanted to be done with it. It's a difficult situation, I'm sure, for many reasons that we don't know or understand, but they're confident that we'll all let it go because no one really cares. Epstein's
Yeah.
dead.
They're
Maxwell's in
trusting that
prison.
people will get over it. Mhm.
People will get over it because no one really cares about sexual abuse victims. And it's hard for me not to think that this isn't coincidental in very shortly after Virginia Giuffre's death,
Yeah.
who was one of the most outspoken victims and one of the victims who explicitly gave testimony that third parties were involved. And now she's gone.
Mhm.
And so, did that lead them to feel even more comfortable in coming out publicly like this? Because she wouldn't be there to say anything. That just makes me feel very sad and just
Yeah.
disappointed.
Me too. And I think all of this too should just like forever put an end to the all what already should have ended, but the claim of, oh well, survivors coming forward. Well, why didn't she come forward earlier? Well, why? Like maybe it's just a cash grab. Maybe someone's making an accusation to try to get famous. Like these are just two very high profile cases, but everyday cases about stalking, about rape, about revenge pornography are slow and rare to justice. And so I just
Yes.
think, and I don't want that to be a discouragement to women to do it because it is so brave and it can have such a huge impact. And maybe, Dani, you could speak to that too, of the impact that it does have when people do speak out and use our justice system to get justice. It's so important, but we have to understand that like these are two just very clear examples of why we need to support survivors who do have like the constitution to come forward in that and to understand it when maybe they're slow to, or there's mitigating factors for them, because man,
I mean,
so hard.
literally, yeah, because literally, this is what the predators bank on is that the women won't want to come forward because the backlash is horrible. I mean, Cassie has received such humiliation and harassment and vile things said about her, beyond what you could possibly imagine. Jane Doe is a Jane Doe for this same reason, and the defense intentionally tried to out her and successfully did so. Honestly, I mean, I still don't know her name, but it basically, my understanding has been widely reported on who her name is because they did that on purpose, and that's disgusting. And Epstein victims, Virginia Giuffre died by suicide, and I know that she was suffering some physical ailments, but according to those who knew her well and closely, whom we know well and closely, she had been relentlessly, horrifically harassed in an orchestrated manner and had her children taken away from her and was an utter despair, also being sued for defamation. She was living in hell, quite literally, for being so brave to stand out. So, no, it is not rewarding. And yet, had she not, and the small group of women who did relentlessly keep speaking out, had they not, Epstein would be alive today doing what he was doing all along. So they changed
Yeah.
the world forever. Now the
Yes.
justice that they and the other victims deserve did not fully come to where it should be. Yet some justice was done, and that's like moving the needle along and opening all of our eyes to how this goes on. So
Mhm.
it's literally only survivors overcoming the overwhelming odds and obstacles and literally making a self-sacrifice heroic decision to come forward, that anything changes. So, and I know from every survivor I've ever worked with that that is the place they come from. They come from a place of, I don't want this to happen to anyone else ever again, and they are literal heroes. But that's where
Mhm.
our society needs to shift. Like, people need to stop with the hero worship. That's a pet peeve of mine that I just know that my disposition, I can't relate to it. And most people tend to like that, right? We tend to like to have heroes. It's a human nature thing, but I don't get it. So I guess I'm here to tell you all stop doing it, because every single person you know and love is capable of bad things,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
And just because he's a nice guy does not mean he's not a terrible predator. And just because she's not a nice girl doesn't mean she isn't a victim of a terrible crime. And
Mhm.
that's essentially what people can't get their minds around at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And like that's where NCOSE can come in. And I hope these are some of the lessons that are learned from all of this. But yeah, it's why something like 1,000 children. How is that even possible? It's because of these blind spots and these biases.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I do think that a sliver of hope or something that gives me some hope in this situation is that while we saw these failures at the level of the justice institutions, in my opinion, we do see public outrage about both of these cases, both the Diddy decision
Yes.
and Epstein memo. I do see the public
And
calling
I
for
was pleased
justice.
by that. I was like, yeah, yeah.
And so I think we do need to continue to educate and advocate and to call out failure in the systems loudly. I mean, that's a part of the reason why our part of our mission statement at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation is to challenge institutions, including our government institutions, to prioritize preventing and intervening in sexual exploitation issues. Uh, and so we do need to continue to do that in order to change these systems. But I am glad at least that the public is recognizing that.
Yeah, that's great. That's such a great point, Haley. Like there's definitely opportunity and hope, and the fact that the public is outraged, I think, shows a growth from where we were. It's just not, I think we all kind of hoped like, oh, like people are seeing trauma and the Me Too movement, people are getting it. So now we've done it, and it's like, okay, no, we haven't come fully where we need to go, but we're trending in the right direction for sure, and that's because of all of the brave men and women who have spoken up. And I hope it's a little bit from the work that we do and our allies do. So for those listening, please keep supporting us and joining us. And we always like to come up with actions and way to get people involved. And I know, Haley, that you and I are still brainstorming on, what can we do about both these cases in terms of turning them into actionable movement for change. So look out for that, because if you're as fired up as us, we'll find a way to engage you on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, it is good to recognize that there is progress happening. It's not all doom and gloom. And one thing that is a victory that we can report is the 10-year AI moratorium, which we had an episode about 1 or 2 weeks ago, which was a horrific idea that was being wrapped into the budget reconciliation bill that states should be prevented from doing any kind of AI safety regulation for a decade. Was removed. It was removed from the bill. And so I do want to thank everyone who took action. I heard from some Hill offices that this was one of the widest group of people they had ever heard from speaking out about the harms of this moratorium, that we need to allow our states to pass good legislation here, especially in the absence of good legislation that has yet come out federally. Um, but it was not a guaranteed victory. It literally happened at 4 a.m.
No.
You know,
And
it was last.
shout out to a public servant actually sticking their neck out and doing something hard because it's the right thing to do. Marsha Blackburn, she
Mhm.
had the moral courage to withdraw this, right? She killed it. And it was
Mhm.
definitely because she felt the support of all of us, but that was still a hard thing for her to do, and she did it. So again, like that's the hope. That's where like you can speak out and something good can come of it. Like truly, especially when
Yeah,
we all engage together. So
absolutely. So thank you all so much for sharing, taking action. It does make such a big difference, especially as we all continue to do it. I know we'll see more victories. Please make sure to subscribe to this episode, share it with a friend, give us a rating. Thank you so much for listening and joining us in ending sexploitation.